The lunch should have been a simple family gathering. A winter afternoon in the quiet rural town of Leongatha, Victoria. A table set with individual beef Wellingtons, golden pastry, rich beef, fillet, and a glossy sauce. But within days, 3 people would be dead. 1 would be fighting for his life. And the woman who prepared that meal, 49-year-old Erin Patterson, would be accused of one of the most shocking domestic poisonings in Australian history. This is the story of the so-called mushroom murders. 29th of July 2023. The Pattersons and the Wilkinsons arrive at Erin's home just before lunchtime. The air is crisp, about 11 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that makes a warm home and a hot meal feel like comfort. By the end of that evening, the comfort would turn to nausea. By the next day, to emergency hospital admissions, and within the week, to tragedy. Death cap mushroom poisoning, one of the deadliest toxins known to medicine, was now suspected. The guests that day were all related by marriage. Don Patterson, a respected member of the community, father to Simon Patterson, Erin's estranged husband. Gail Patterson, Don's wife, known for her warmth and involvement in her church. Heather Wilkinson, Gail's sister, a beloved pastor's wife and mother. Ian Wilkinson, Heather's husband, the local Baptist pastor. Only Ian would survive, after weeks in intensive care and a liver transplant. The others would never go home again. Erin Patterson was no stranger to her guests. She'd been married to Simon Patterson for years before their separation, and these were her former in-laws. The lunch had reportedly been arranged to try to mend family relationships. What Erin served and what happened next would become the focus of a police investigation that spanned nearly 2 years, culminating in her arrest, trial, and conviction for murder and attempted murder. Leongatha is the kind of place where neighbours still wave to each other from their driveways. Rolling dairy country surrounds the small town, and in winter the air smells faintly of wet grass and wood smoke. It's not the kind of place where you expect a triple homicide. But the lunch on that Saturday would change that forever. Police and prosecutors later said the beef Wellington pastries were made with a mix of store-bought mushrooms and deadly Amanita phallides, death caps. These mushrooms can cause catastrophic liver failure, and just one can be enough to kill an adult. Within hours of eating, the guests began to feel unwell. At first, it might have felt like a simple stomach bug, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps. But with death cap poisoning, the symptoms are deceptive. After an initial phase of illness, there's often a period of apparent recovery. Then, without warning, the toxin attacks the liver, and the decline can be swift and irreversible. By Sunday, all 4 guests were in hospital. Over the next several days, their conditions worsened. Don and Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson died from liver failure. Ian Wilkinson clung to life, undergoing urgent medical treatment that included a liver transplant. From the moment the deaths were reported, suspicion turned toward the woman who had cooked the meal. Erin Patterson told police she had not intended to harm anyone. She claimed she herself had eaten part of the meal, though without becoming seriously ill. But the detectives weren't convinced. Victoria Police Homicide Squad detectives began collecting evidence from the property, including a food dehydrator that, according to police, had traces of the same deadly mushroom toxin. Reports later said the dehydrator was found at a local tip after being discarded. To investigators, the question was clear. Was this a tragic accident or something far more sinister? The mushroom murders case gripped Australia and made headlines around the world. It had all the elements of a crime drama. A small town family ties an invisible natural weapon and a suspect who maintained her innocence. As weeks turned into months, the investigation quietly gathered momentum: phone records, internet search histories, toxicology reports, witness interviews. Behind closed doors, prosecutors were building their case. By November 2023, Erin Patterson would be arrested and charged. But the evidence police claimed to have uncovered, and the way it was presented to the jury, would raise chilling questions about intent, planning, and motive. We'll step back and learn who these victims were, what their lives meant to their families and community, and why this lunch mattered so much to them. Before the headlines called them victims, before the medical charts and toxicology reports, they were simply people, family, friends, neighbours. They were people who lived, loved, and built a life in one of Victoria's most close-knit rural communities. Don Patterson was the kind of man whose handshake could tell you everything you needed to know about him. Firm, steady, no rush. He had spent much of his life in Gippsland, raising his family with the quiet work ethic that defined men of his generation. Don was known in town as dependable, measured, and deeply committed to those he loved. Friends recall how he would stop whatever he was doing to help a neighbour, whether that meant fixing a fence or simply lending an ear. His death left not just an empty seat at family gatherings, but a hollow in the daily rhythms of the town itself. Beside him in life was Gail Patterson, his wife of many decades. Gail's presence could change the atmosphere of a room. Her warmth was that immediate. She was deeply involved in her church community, known for her generosity and her gift for making others feel valued. In a place where everyone knows everyone, Gail was one of those rare people universally liked. Her faith was central to her life, and she often volunteered her time for community events, fundraisers, and visiting those in need. When news spread that Gail had fallen gravely ill, the local congregation gathered in prayer. When she passed, the grief was palpable, a shared wound. Heather Wilkinson, Gail's sister, carried the same generous spirit. She was married to Ian Wilkinson, the local Baptist pastor, and had built a life centered around faith, family, and service. Heather was a familiar face at community gatherings, always ready with a kind word or a home-baked cake for a church morning tea. Her loss was especially cruel, not just for her family, but for the church members who saw her as a constant presence in their lives. Heather and Gail had a bond that went beyond sisterhood. Friends say the two were inseparable, their laughter often the soundtrack to family get-togethers. The only survivor of the lunch was Ian Wilkinson. Ian was more than just the pastor at the local Baptist church. He was a friend, a mentor, and a trusted figure in Leongatha. Known for his compassion and his ability to listen without judgment, Ian had presided over weddings, comforted grieving families, and guided his congregation through life's trials. When he was rushed to hospital with the same poisoning that claimed his wife and in-laws, the community feared they might lose him too. He spent weeks in intensive care, undergoing a liver transplant and an agonizing recovery. Those who visited him in hospital say his spirit remained unbroken, though the emotional weight of losing his wife and close family was something no surgery could fix. On the surface, the lunch on 29th July 2023 was meant to be an olive branch. Erin Patterson, separated from her husband Simon, was said to be trying to mend fractured family ties. The guest list wasn't random. These were the people most connected to her estranged marriage. The table would have been filled with small talk, catching up on local news, maybe even cautious laughter. No one could have imagined that the meal in front of them contained one of the most potent natural poisons known to medicine. In the days following the tragedy, grief settled heavily over Leongatha and the nearby town of Korumbura. Church services became memorials. Local businesses placed flowers and handwritten notes in their windows. News crews parked on quiet residential streets, their satellite vans and cameras a stark contrast to the usual weekend calm. Neighbours whispered questions no one could answer. Was it an accident? Was it intentional? And if it was deliberate, why? For the families, there was no why that could undo what had happened. The only thing left was absence. The empty chairs at Sunday services, the missed birthdays, the milestones that would never be shared. By the time the investigation began in earnest, this case was no longer just a matter of forensic evidence. It had become deeply personal, for the police officers tasked with piecing together what happened, for the doctors who fought to save the victims, and for the families left behind. Every new detail brought fresh pain. Every media headline was a reminder. In cases like this, justice isn't just about the law, it's about acknowledging the full humanity of those who were lost. The last time Don, Gail, Heather and Ian sat down to a meal together, it was in Erin Patterson's dining room. Hours later, they would be fighting for their lives. We'll walk through that day step by step, the lunch, the symptoms, and the moment doctors realised they were dealing with a rare and deadly poisoning. From the moment doctors suspected death cap mushroom poisoning, Victoria Police treated the 29th of July lunch as a potential homicide. In rural towns, it's rare for the homicide squad to set up shop. But now, investigators in plain clothes moved quietly through Leongatha, collecting statements, tracing supply chains, and looking for any clue that could explain how one lunch had turned lethal. Toxicology results confirmed it. The victims had ingested Amanita phalloides. The same toxin was found in food remnants from the meal. Police bagged and tagged items from Erin Patterson's kitchen, including cutting boards, knives, and cooking trays. But the most significant find was a food dehydrator, not in the house, but in a local tip. Detectives allege Erin had discarded it shortly after the lunch. Tests revealed traces of the same mushroom toxin. The prosecution would later argue this was the device used to dry or prepare the poisonous mushrooms for the beef Wellington's filling. While forensic teams worked in the lab, another team was combing through Erin's digital footprint. Search warrants covered her phone, laptop, and online accounts. Prosecutors later revealed that her devices contained search queries related to deadly mushrooms, including how to prepare them and how to treat mushroom poisoning. In court, the defense would try to downplay these searches, suggesting they were made out of curiosity or after-the-fact research. The prosecution called them proof of knowledge and intent. Friends, family, and neighbours were interviewed. Some recalled Erin speaking about mushrooms in the weeks prior. Others provided context about her relationship with the victims, particularly her estranged husband Simon Patterson, who, notably, was invited to the lunch but did not attend. A few witnesses recalled Erin mentioning that she had cooked a separate meal for her children that day, one that did not contain the mushrooms. To investigators, this was another red flag. Detectives also worked closely with toxicologists and hepatologists, liver specialists, to fully understand the timeline of symptoms and the medical impossibility of survival once the toxin reached certain levels in the bloodstream. Medical experts were clear. The deaths were consistent with deliberate ingestion of a lethal dose, not accidental cross-contamination. By late 2023, police believed they had a cohesive narrative. Erin Patterson obtained death cap mushrooms. She prepared them using the dehydrator. She incorporated them into the beef Wellington duxelle. She served that dish specifically to 4 people, 3 of whom died, and 1 of whom barely survived. The discarded dehydrator, the toxicology results, and the internet searches were presented as the pillars of the case. On 3 November 2023, Erin Patterson was arrested at her home and charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. Some of those attempted murder counts related to alleged prior incidents involving her estranged husband. At her first court appearance, Erin pleaded not guilty. Her lawyer told reporters she maintained the poisonings were an accident, but police were confident the evidence would speak for itself. With the investigation complete, the case moved toward trial. A trial that would stretch across months, packed with forensic charts, witness testimony, and a defendant who never wavered from her claim of innocence. We'll step into the courtroom. From opening statements to cross-examinations, here's how the mushroom murders unfolded before a jury. The trial of Erin Patterson began in April 2025 at the Victorian Supreme Court. From the moment the jury was sworn in, it was clear this case had captured the public's imagination and horror. Every seat in the public gallery was filled. Journalists packed into the press benches, and camera crews waited outside on William Street. The prosecution wasted no time laying out its narrative. Their claim: Erin Patterson had deliberately served a meal laced with death cap mushrooms to 4 specific guests, knowing it would kill them. Their motive theory: to target members of her estranged husband's family amid ongoing personal tensions. They pointed to the forensic evidence: the dehydrator with traces of amatoxin, toxicology from the victims, and internet searches about mushroom preparation and treatment. They described the sequence of symptoms as textbook death cap poisoning. The defense countered with a simple premise: this was a tragic accident. Erin, they said, had no reason to harm the guests. The searches could have been made after people became ill. The dehydrator's disposal? A matter of convenience, not concealment. Prosecutors called toxicologists who testified that the victims' symptoms and lab results matched high-dose amanita ingestion. One expert held up a laminated photograph of a death cap mushroom, explaining to the jury how its amatoxins survive heat, freezing, and drying. Another described the near inevitability of death without a liver transplant. Jurors were told that just 1 mushroom could be fatal, and that the meal likely contained multiple caps. Forensic scientists walked the jury through lab charts linking toxin samples from the victims, the leftover food, and the dehydrator. Ian Wilkinson, still visibly gaunt from his ordeal, testified with quiet resolve. He recounted the lunch in vivid detail: the taste, the conversation, the first wave of nausea later that night. His voice wavered only when speaking about Heather, his wife of decades, who died days later. He told the jury he'd been invited along with the others, but Simon Patterson, Erin's estranged husband, had not attended. Prosecutors subtly suggested this was significant. When Erin took the stand, her demeanour was calm, but her words were measured. She repeated her claim that she had also eaten part of the meal, but had removed mushrooms from her portion. She denied intentionally using death caps and said she believed the mushrooms were safe, sourced from a local supermarket and an Asian grocer. Under cross-examination, prosecutors pressed her on why her children had been served a different meal that day. Erin said it was simply because they didn't like mushrooms. Then came the dehydrator. Prosecution: Why did you throw it away? Erin: It was taking up space. I panicked when people started getting sick. The prosecution suggested she panicked because she knew it contained incriminating evidence. The prosecution's final address to the jury was a tightly wound thread of facts and inference. The victims all ate the same mushroom-filled dish. The mushrooms were proven to be death caps. The only person who prepared the meal was Erin Patterson. The disposal of the dehydrator was deliberate. Internet searches proved awareness of the mushroom's lethality. The defense argued the case relied on circumstantial evidence and speculation. They urged the jury to consider the possibility of an innocent mistake. On 7th of July 2025, after deliberating for 2 days, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood and read the verdicts. Guilty. 3 counts of murder. Guilty, 1 count of attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson. Erin Patterson showed little visible reaction. Behind her, members of both the Patterson and Wilkinson families held each other tightly. The judge thanked the jury for their service, noting the complexity and emotional weight of the case. Sentencing was scheduled for 25th August 2025, with victim impact statements to be heard. Outside, prosecutors spoke briefly to the media, calling the verdict a testament to meticulous investigative work. Ian Wilkinson, flanked by supporters, said simply, "This won't bring them back, but it is some measure of justice." The legal process wasn't over. Erin Patterson still faced the prospect of life in prison, and her defence team had the standard 28-day window to lodge an appeal after sentencing. We'll look at the aftermath, the sentencing, the community's healing, and the unanswered questions that still linger over the mushroom murders. On 25th August 2025, the Supreme Court of Victoria reconvened for Erin Patterson's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was quieter than during the trial. Fewer journalists, fewer curious onlookers. But for those directly involved, the emotions were raw. Family members took turns at the witness stand, reading statements that painted vivid portraits of Don, Gail, and Heather. One described Don's steadiness and how his absence left a gaping hole in daily life. Another recalled Gail's kindness, her habit of dropping by with home-cooked meals for friends in need. Heather's children spoke softly but firmly about losing their mother in such a sudden, violent way. The words were often interrupted by tears, pauses, and the kind of silence that fills a room when grief becomes too heavy to bear. Ian Wilkinson, the sole survivor, delivered his own statement. He spoke of his long, painful recovery, the physical toll of a liver transplant, and the constant reminder of loss. His voice broke when he said, "I have learned to walk again, but I will never walk into my home and see my wife waiting for me." Justice Margaret Fenton addressed Erin directly. She called the crimes calculated and cruel, noting the deliberate choice of weapon and the targeting of specific guests. The court imposed 3 life sentences for murder and 1 life sentence for attempted murder to be served concurrently. The judge set a non-parole period of 32 years, meaning Erin would be eligible for release in her 80s. The defence signalled an intention to consider an appeal, citing potential errors in the jury's assessment of circumstantial evidence. In Leongatha, the trial's end did not erase the deep scars. At the Baptist church where Ian once preached alongside Heather, a memorial garden was planted in honour of all 3 victims. Locals said the case had changed the town forever. People were more cautious, more guarded, but there was also a quiet determination to remember the victims for their lives, not their deaths. The Mushroom Murders case remained a topic on talk shows, podcasts, and news documentaries. Many were fascinated by the almost cinematic elements. A rural town, a family meal, a rare and deadly toxin. But among legal analysts, the case was also a study in circumstantial evidence. No eyewitnesses, no confession, but a chain of forensic and behavioural clues that convinced a jury beyond reasonable doubt. Even with the guilty verdict, questions remain. Where exactly did the death-cap mushrooms come from? Did Erin truly intend to kill? Or could there be a more complicated psychological motive? And why did she invite those specific guests, and no one else, to that lunch? For some, those questions are academic. For the families, they are a reminder that no amount of legal closure can fully answer the why. In the end, the mushroom murders will be remembered not only for the sensational headlines, but for the devastating personal toll. 3 lives ended, 1 forever altered, and a community left to grapple with the knowledge that such violence could happen over something as ordinary as a shared meal. For investigators, it will stand as one of Victoria's most unusual and challenging murder cases. For the people of Leongatha, it will always be a scar, one that time may fade but never fully erase. In the words of Ian Wilkinson, spoken outside the court after sentencing, forgiveness will come in time, but trust is gone. Do you think justice was truly served here? Answer this question in comment section.